blind man crossed the road, trying to make the other side. Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of birth.
Pray that he's still out there, somewhere.
Well, welcome to Eating While Honey and Locusts, and I'm Jessica Knock. Thank you for joining us today. It's always wonderful to be with you Tuesday by Tuesday and Friday by Friday. Before we go into our discussion, which I'm really quite excited about today, I always like to set the floor with the president of where we're going, to an element or so of that. And, you know, this is what I want to say to you. Stephen and I, with Eating While Honey and Sefer programs that we do together, we've been doing this for just over 6 months now, and it's been a privilege to serve Yahuah, to serve Yah, and do this together, because the ministries, us personally, we share the same passions, we share the same frustrations, we share the same understanding of what needs to be shared in these times, and we have that heartbeat of Yahuah, of Yah, for those things. And it's really about Ephesians 5 verse 11. You know, this is why we do what we do, and I know this is why you join with us, because you are like-hearted, you are like in spirit as well, and we are one together. It's like iron sharpening iron. And then we're also speaking to those that are inquiring, and those who are having ears to begin to hear, and eyes that walk from a circumcised heart, that they're beginning to see things so differently. So Ephesians 5, it says simply this, and it's a command, it's a direction: have nothing to do with the works of darkness, but rather expose them. And that is what we are about, exposing them and standing up, coming out of her, lest we partake in the same fornications. We are standing strong, and we are standing unique. You are called for this time. I am called for this time. Stephen, John, Stuart are called for this time. Everyone is called for this time, but you've got to recognize it, and you've got to pick up the baton. It's not automatic. That's what it means. Picking up and running with that baton is you working out your salvation in fear and trembling. We are literally carrying the final torch, the final baton before Yahushua's return. Again, you have to recognize it and not take it for granted. So many people are still in their slumber, still asleep on their couches, and don't even recognize it. Take nothing for advantage. And that's why I want to minister to you today and say you are purposed for this time. Mordecai turned to his niece Esther and said, you have risen for royalty into the kingdom for such a time as this. You have risen into the kingdom for such a time as this. She prepared herself with her fragrances and her beauty routines to present herself before the king. We present ourselves in those same chambers with everything going around us, so that we have the opportunity to be a voice piece, to be an ambassador, to be a true testimony in this time before Yahushua's return. It's plain, it's simple. That's how it is. I'm so tired. I know you're so tired, so many of you, of hearing this narrative of we are going into revival. We are in revival. We're in renewal. You see, as far as I see, for the past 3 years, that died in 2019, definitely 2020. That era, that type of evangelism is completely over. And we're moving into a critical, crucial juncture that we have to again recognize and hold the baton and move in this new pattern, this new position. Revelation 13, you're also familiar with it. It simply says, he who leads into captivity will be taken into captivity, will be led into captivity. I'm talking about the hirelings that we just heard me mention about. We're in revival, we're in renewal. Those same hirelings this week are praying for the COP27 convention, praying for global warming, praying for climate change from a woke perspective. They will not address what's happening right now, but they will speak such narratives. And these are the people that are supposed to have spiritual leadership over people are over our lives. We have to stand up and be that David with our 5 stones and sling and know how to fortify the flesh of the devil and cut it off. We have to know our weaponry. It goes on to say these same hireling shepherds will be led first. Those who kill by the sword will be killed by the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the Kodashim, which means the patience and the faith of the saints. It's really important, that we get these little fundamentals, but we understand because it's encouraging and it affirms us and it moves us into the next phase of strength and action. We are in the end times, we are in the end days, and we shall see the end come. Matthew 24 says that, and the bearer suit of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness unto the nations, and then the end shall come. You just think about the advancement of the internet, and you can see where we are, how even 10 years ago to where we are today. You don't need to travel on a plane to get to every tribe and nation. You can just do it through the flick of a button from your own home in your computers, as we are communicating today, as we are presenting and you're watching. When Shane and I went on mission, different places like India, Brazil, different countries, third world countries, no matter where we went, no matter how much of a shack the shanty town was, the place was that they lived, somehow through the mud, through the pebbles, through the devastation, they had wires left, right and center going into these mud huts, giving access to electricity. So they had some type of television, some type of phone and internet. So you can see how things have changed. The commission for us has changed. Therefore, we need to be in possession of the heart of in these pivotal times that subscribes to Jeremiah, who wept, who lamented, but he also carried a light and he carried a joy, and he was fierce to be an ambassador of truth and to say, repent, rise up and rebuke. We need to be of that same standing. We need to be of Ezekiel 9, verse 4 says, for those who sigh and cry and weep for the detestable things, others versions say, for the abominations committed in their city, committed in their land. This has to be our heart. This has to be our stand. That is part of the mantle. That is part of the baton that I was talking about, because we are a distinctive assembly. We haven't come out of one hat, Christendom, and moved into another hat. We are completely distinctive, set apart, called out. I'm not saying that in an area of pride. I'm showing you this is how we walk. This is how we maneuver in the spirit. This is how we apply the word in our daily lives for supernatural living, answered prayer in worship in a sovereign way. This is how we're out working. That's sovereignty, because we are a remnant of hope. We are a pillar of light. We have to be that immovable stone, so strong and as hard as flint, but unquenchable, because we carry purpose and truth. And that is the purpose of this program today. That is the purpose of Dr. Pidgeon and I and our guest today joining. This is why we do what we do. Ephesians 5. There is a purpose in everything. You know what excites me? And I know this is going to even unpack more in this program today. The seals, even 10, 20 years ago, they were definitely closed. We can see how it's escalated to the point that even over the last 3 years, it's beginning to open. And they are unveiling themselves. What a privilege of a timeline that we are in, to see that in our lifetime, if you receive it, if you perceive it. And the thing is that we are still coming to understand in its entirety what is happening, because it's still unfolding. And as it happens, we have the privilege of seeing what is happening. And we could be fearful, but we have the word, we have the bearer suit to show us what is going ahead. So we're one step of the game, and we stand strong and we accomplish everything in strength of the word, by the power of the word. So I hope that empowers you today and gets you excited as I bring on our first guest. Now, our first guest is a returning guest. He's Jon Hallam. He's based in the United Kingdom, part of where we are from. So it's really great to have you, Jon. You came on here 2 weeks ago and shared your presentation with myself and Dr. Pidgeon. And, you work in the beast system. You do such a hard job.
Yeah,
And
thank you very much,
you're a great
Jess.
researcher.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be here on the show, and it's all about sharing the truth. you know. And as you dig into the truth and start sharing experiences with the called out assembly, effectively, you know, it's then it all starts to make sense. And that's what these sessions for me is about, sharing that information, sharing the truth, and having joy. And I think some of the verses we'll share first on all about that. So thank you, Jess. Appreciate
Yeah,
that.
thank you, John. It's exciting to have you with Dr. P, who I'm going to bring on now. It's wonderful to have you on together, Dr. P. It's always a pleasure to have you on because you bring so much to the table. And then we walk away from that table having to digest it and learn and waiting for the next meal that you unpack for us. So thank you and welcome today.
Well, thank you, Jesse. Great to see you again, John, by the way. Thanks for your preparation for today, by the way, too. I think it's going to be quite good. Yeah, you know, Jesse, you mentioned something very true about this COP27 conference, where they're adopting the 10 commandments of the new worldwide religion,
Yeah.
right? Which is really Gaia worship. It's Gaia worship. And so it's not new at all, really. It's Babylonian, it's Sumerian in its content and in its idea. And they're going to be worshiping Earth. And it's amazing because, you know, once again, the Pope begs the question, is the Pope Catholic? I mean, it's no longer just really a joke, but a really strong rhetorical question, you know.
Yeah.
And, that conference really bodes ill for all of mankind. And it is a complete betrayal. And this is something that people don't want to talk about, but you have to talk about it, especially given the fact that your own prime minister was present at the conference.
Yeah.
This is a complete betrayal of the faith that is the heart and soul of Britain. It's a complete betrayal. I mean, what is going on here? I mean, you know, these clergy should be calling this out as anathema. They should be calling it out as anathema, and they're not. And so that's a great tragedy. And once again, you know, it's one thing to look out over the castle walls and see the enemy approaching. Another thing to have someone burning the castle down from the inside. And treason is a much more difficult enemy. Traitors are a much more difficult enemy than the enemy abroad, because you can see the enemy abroad. You can plan for what they're going to do. A traitor, you don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, I know. It's so sad, Dr. P, how this is being supported from places that it shouldn't be, and the wrong message is going out, and people just go with the wind. They want to be led. They are not learning. They're not being Bereans for themselves. So it's quite tragic to see, actually. Very, very tragic.
And the fact that they're sort of going to have this repentance ceremony, you know, this whole mass of repentance for you know, for what? For harming the planet. You know, this whole Gaia thing again. You know, the only grace we have is that the Egyptians have said you can't have it on the mount, right, on Mount Sinai, so they have it out of London and I think out of India, right? So that's one blessing, that it's not straight on the mount itself. Otherwise, there might be some acts going on, you know. But you know, it's like it's just an abomination. That's all I can say. It's just, I mean, you just got to keep your mouth. I mean, what do you say? It just, you know, it's just an agog, really. It's just a shock, this whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. And it's all false. Everything about it is false. I mean, the religion is false. The people organizing it are false. Most of them are usurpers to their office.
Yes.
And they're leading us down a path of, you know, when you start saying climate change, and, you know, it amazes me because on one hand, you have people talking about, oh, climate change is the top issue. Are they doing anything to stop chemtrails? Nothing. In fact, they're keeping them going. They're probably the single largest agitator of the climate on the planet is chemtrails. The other thing is you know, weather wars that are being orchestrated by things like the high antenna array HARP that they use to heat the water. The third thing is, of course, no one wants to speak about it, is the microwave radiation that comes off cell phones, you know, and the internet. And nobody is going to talk about. We're going to talk about this coming Friday, I think, with Mark. But no one wants to talk about the real pollution. Instead, they claim that your carbon footprint, your exhalation, is a criminal act. That's a criminal act. And essentially, by labeling it a criminal act, they are able to come in and declare life itself to be a privilege granted by the state on conditions of your subservience to this new god, Gaia.
Yeah.
But that's where we're headed.
Yeah. It's sad. And they're already there in many ways. So they're just
We are,
cementing it in.
and the mechanics in the background are in there. You know, you just have to look at some of the carbon tax things they're putting into the financial industry now. You know, the ESG tax things they're putting on big companies. You know, I mean, I lived in Luxembourg in the year 2000 for a few years, and even then they had microchips on bins to measure your carbon footprint on your green waste and your brown waste and whatever. You had about 4 or 5 types of waste. That's going back 20 years. So you know, you can imagine where they are now in terms of facilities and programs and things in place to take that to the next level.
One of the viewers here said, Kevin Williams, depopulation is really their agenda. No different to New World Order, no one different to WHO. You know, it just continues, doesn't it? Different strands, same message, same thing.
Mm-hmm. And they're all concerned with the population because they do not trust Yah. You know, when here in Alaska, you know, we had an out of control moose population, and it was a result of the manipulation of the Fish and Wildlife Service. They decided, you know, moose big, moose good, we need more moose. Well, that was a big fatal error. They should have let the ecosystem handle itself. So they doubled the moose population. And of course, about half of them died that winter from starvation and being run over by trains and so on and so forth. And the following year was back to where it was supposed to be. And one thing you have to keep in mind is that even with an overpopulation of any species, Yah takes care of it. When you hit a certain population level, Yah takes care of it. The population decreases.
Yeah.
But we are of the arrogance that to say, oh no, we have the capability to overpopulate Yah's will on the earth. And I just don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. In fact, if you look at Europe and you look at the United States, really all the Western world, you see a dramatic, absolutely plunge off the cliff demographic in terms of our repopulation. The only reason Europe is the size it is, the only reason America is the size it is because we have been infiltrated with immigrants, you know, in the millions and millions and millions. Without those immigrants, we in the United States would have suffered a similar population decline as has France and Germany and the UK and Spain and Italy, where the birth rate is so low that there's no repopulation going on. I mean, they estimate that by 2050, there won't be a single German living in Germany. And the biggest population decline on earth, no one wants to talk about this, it has to be kept private, is in Russia. Russia has a birth rate of like 0.8.
Yeah.
0.8. I mean, it is so abysmally low. You need a 2.3 to just can maintain your population, and a 0.8 to plummet off the cliff. And when you see this 0.8 birth rate, what do you see going on in Russia? In addition to the 0.8 birth rate, another thing that's never told about Russia is that they have one of the highest abortion rates in the world. You know, the average Russian woman has 8 abortions over a lifetime. Wow. You know, the average Russian woman. And you have a systemic decline in the demography of all the Western world. And this systemic decline is due to the fact that Yah is simply going to terminate the unrighteous. I mean, that's what's going on. You know, when you were in the glory of Yah, when you were in the blessing of Yah, your population continued, the strength of your culture expanded, your nation state became great. You became the tail and not the head. Now we're very much the tail. I mean, we became the head, not the tail. Now we're very much the tail. We're on the receiving end of all of this. And it seems that the world has in its equation, not reducing the 1.5 billion people in India, not reducing the 1.5 billion people in China, but rather, you know, reducing the 400 million in Europe and reducing the 400 million in North America. That's who has to go away, right?
Yeah. That sounds quite in key with and in line with the first command of the Georgia Guidestones as well. Maintain humanity under 500 million in, what is it, in perpetual balance of Gaia, of nature. So it's just a circle, isn't it? A full circle.
Well, it's a secular humanism. And again, it begins with the idea that there's no trust that Yah can handle it. Oh, Yah can't handle the population of the earth. I mean, he's got a lot of things under control, but he can't handle population because there's nothing we can do to talk the Chinese into having fewer kids, said Henry Kissinger, right? And so this entire agenda has been absolutely ludicrous. And they're finding that even with the one-child policy and even with the heavy abortion regimen, you still cannot slow down the population growth in the third world or in the second world. You can't do it. You can't do it. So what are they talking about? What they're really talking about, and I have to tell you, I wrote a book on this. So if you're going to get me started, I'm going to go too far. But I wrote a book called Pale Green Horse, Behold a Pale Green Horse. And I detail all of this agenda. You know, a lot of it came from Prince Philip, the Greek. A lot of it came from Maurice Strong. A lot of it came from Bernard. I have to remember his name now. Anyway, he was the most wicked man of the 20th century, in my opinion. The most wicked in the 19th, John D. Rockefeller. And the most wicked in the 20th century was, I'll have to remember his name. Anyway, he wrote The Impact of Science on Society in 1953. And this book that he wrote, he wants to take the earth down to 150 million people. 150 million people. And he advocated at the outset the complete extermination of every human being living in Africa. And so, you know, I mean, when you see this, and this all comes down to the Malthusian concept, there's too many people on earth. And who was Malthus? He was a 16th century Puritan pastor in Britain who believed that with the creation of Eve, there became too many people on earth. Thomas Malthus, right? And so this is a Malthusian concept. And so everybody runs around thinking there's too many people, there's too many people, there's too many people, there's too many people. And you know, I, for one, live in an area where there's not too many people. And one of the problems we deal with here is people living alone and not seeing anybody over the winter.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Can you come over and visit, please? You know?
Wow.
And so it's a very significant issue. There's not too many people on earth. There's just too many leaders that have no accountability. No accountability. And this is what the real problem is. And what's mind-boggling to me, Jesse, is here we go. We have all these people that are leaders in the Western world who are going to embrace ideology that says we need to get rid of the people in the Western world.
Yeah.
And they have no concept. They have no accountability. They have no recognition that this is what's going on. They don't even know they're doing it. That's called judgment.
Wow.
It's amazing how much blinding is going on at the moment, because even with, you know, even subjects like today, right, I share books with other people, etc. And, you know, it's people's eyes are opened if they are for certain topics, let's put it that way. Otherwise, they're blinded. And so you can get people that are very articulate, educated, blah, 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 and you show them some truths that you think is just jaw-dropping, basically, and they just either in disbelief or just walk away from it. It's just and I think this is a spiritual blindness that's put on to people that are not part of the equation, let's say, in terms of maybe some of the, and I don't know, but I don't know how to explain it, but there seems to be different types of spiritual blindness at the minute to different types of people, and it might be, I'm not sure if it, you know, it's just interesting to look around and just see. And even things on a train platform this morning, there's a guy there freaking out on his phone about something, and people seem to be more extreme now than they used to be, even 2 or 3 years ago. You know, there's less tolerance, there's more ignition from a emotional perspective on trivial things in public places than I've seen. You know, and I've obviously been locked down for a few years, but it's interesting to note, right?
We're seeing it in the States now, really significant shootings breaking out in all kinds of places. School got shot up today in Washington. There's been centers where people have opened fire. You know, I mean, it's going crazy. And of course, the real trigger, I believe, is going to happen today and in the next couple of days in the United States, because we've entered into an election. And we have two disparate philosophies in the United States. We have one who believe that an election is about counting votes. And then we have another group who believes that an election is about affirming their tyranny over the country and has nothing to do with what the votes have to do with at all. And so we really are suffering from an acute fascism in the United States, really unprecedented fascism. And this fascism is going to rear its head, because should they lose this election today and they're unable to rig it like they did in 2020, because the disparity is so huge, well, then it's going to come to violence. And there are many people, in fact, our good friend Scott Bennett, who's currently in Lebanon, by the way, if people want to know where he is, he's currently in Lebanon. And he's doing some other travels, but he's just recently published video talking about the coming revolution in the United States. And I do believe it's also going to, there's not just me publishing this, there's been, I don't know, at least a dozen commentators, political commentators, including Michael Snyder, who, by the way, wrote a piece here just recently, was very strong. It appears that violence is on the table in the United States because people are done talking. We had a belief in the system that the system was going to have a curative effect, a curative measure, which is called the election, that the populace would be able to cure the difficulties of the country by voting that guy out and voting this guy in. Now, there's no credibility left in the election system. There's no credibility left in the federal government because the federal government has been weaponized. Now, this is an important word to use, is the weaponization, because one of the things that happened that has cost the United States dearly is that Joe Biden weaponized the currency. And he was not the only one. I mean, Bush did it, Clinton did it, and everybody else did it. But they weaponized the currency by initiating this term called sanctions. We're going to sanction your country. We're going to deprive you of this. We're going to deprive you of that. We're going to seize your bank accounts. We're going to do this. And when we did that, we weaponized the currency. And weaponize the currency, you take out the neutrality of the currency. For the currency to have full faith and credit, it has to be expressly neutral. In other words, the reason you use currency is because it is a agreed upon neutral arbiter between me and you in an exchange of goods, services, ideas, or whatever it is we're doing. You have something that you value in your hands. I'm going to buy it from you for something of a like value, an agreed upon value. But I'm not going to give you my eggs for your book. I'm going to give you the $5 or the 5 pounds it would take to buy your book so that you can buy my 5 pounds worth of eggs or someone else's eggs. But it's the fungibility of currency. And the fungibility of currency is directly dependent upon its absolute neutrality. As soon as you weaponize the currency, it loses its neutrality. And when that weaponization becomes widespread, as it did during the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration, the currency loses all credibility. And when it loses all credibility, people look for alternatives. And they might look for alternatives in terms of bartering. But the fact that the BRICS nations have come forward with an alternative trading system allowed these people to immediately flee the SWIFT system and to transit over to the BRICS system and to transit over to currencies that were backed by commodities such as gold, like the ruble is. The ruble is backed by gold. So as a consequence, some of the smart central banks are starting to buy gold bullion right now, as much as they possibly can get away with while they're rigging the market, keeping the price artificially low. But you're seeing that there is a push towards real value. And this push towards real value is going to continue to go because the currency was weaponized. Well, it's the same thing when you weaponize the FBI or you weaponize the DOJ or you weaponize the Department of Defense. When you weaponize these things, you lose credibility. The credibility goes out. It's shot. Now you're perceived as a weapon, not as a neutral arbiter. It's like, for instance, imagine if I came in and told you in the British press, we have bought and paid for the Supreme Court Chief Justice. He's now owned by the Crown, and all of his decisions are going to be made on behalf of the Crown. Suppose I put that, right out in the sun, right? I put it out there so everybody can see it. Now, how many people are going to take anything to that court? You're not going to take anything to that court because it's no longer a court. The guy is incapable of judging. He's a bought-off sycophant. He's got no capacity whatsoever to render a judgment. So this is exactly what we see going on in the United States. The entirety of the federal government has been weaponized, and it's been weaponized against, first of all, the people of the United States. Secondly, against the people of Europe. Now, Europe is beginning to perceive this. Holland came out 2 days ago and said, we're done with the sanctions. We're not doing them anymore. We're done with the sanctions. And thanks to the actions of, shamed Prime Minister Liz Truss, the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 was blown up on her command. That's been proven. Sweden's proved it, and it's been proven by Kim.com, who has her texting and Lincoln. It's done 1 minute after the detonation. Liz Truss has taken some actions that have put the UK at extreme risk Let's don't mince any words about it. She put the UK at extreme risk with her absolute catastrophic incompetence. But at any rate, what you see is when they blew up Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, they were under the impression that they could cut Germany and all of the continent off from Russian gas. Well, they can't. And Holland has now said, we're not doing this anymore. We're opening the gates and we're opening the terminals. Bring in your ships full of Russian gas and we're going to buy them. Because they know what the winter is looking like in Germany. They know what the winter is looking like in Austria. They know what it's looking like. Now, in the meantime, Italy is now refusing to sell anything, put any weapons at all in Ukraine. Switzerland has reached the same agreement. You will not put any Swiss weapons in Ukraine. This has already been said, okay? And should the Republicans grab control of the House of Representatives today, the push is going to be on to terminate all funding to Ukraine. Terminate all funding. It should be done. Now, that won't stop, of course, the Biden administration from moving forward the best they can. But the point being is that the Biden administration has weaponized the U.S. federal government against the continent of Europe as well. He's weaponized it against the continent of Europe. Who got hurt from those Russian sanctions? Was it Russia? They seem to be floating along fine. Who got hurt? Austria, Germany, Holland, Belgium, France, Spain, Italy, the UK. Look at what you guys are going through now.
Yeah.
Look at the prices you're having to pay. And you're having to pay these prices because Biden thought the best economic plan for the UK? No. He's weaponized against you. And the threat is move all of your technologies to the United States. Because we're going to put Europe back into a second world status. So get your technologies out of Germany, get your industrial and your manufacturing base out of Germany and replant it in the United States. I mean, that's literally an ongoing discussion. That's the discussion that's ongoing. And I don't think this is going to happen, frankly. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think instead what's going to happen is you're going to see the judgment of Yahuah come upon all these things.
Yes.
So I think what needs to happen from here now is that, again, people think that I'm kind of UK oriented, and the people who have worked hard to try to overthrow what the Sefer is doing, there's always mutiny on the bounty. I can tell you that there's always mutiny on the bounty. But I can tell you that, my emphasis is not necessarily the UK, although you guys know I have a great love for the UK. But the love of the UK for me it's my mission field, and it's my mission field because I believe that the UK holds the heart of the faith, because the faith began here. Now, this is some of the things we discovered at Lutterworth, and I'm hoping John's going to be able to talk about a lot of these things today with his presentation.
Yeah. If Stuart, you can bring up that presentation, then we can go into it as well. Everything that you're saying, Stephen, it's Yah's judgment, and he puts that spirit of slumber upon them. So I just wanted to bring that in. It says that, and Amos says that, and Hosea, and these are his judgments because their heart is far from me. In summary of everything that you've said, but over to you, John.
Sure, thank you. So, I mean, as we walk on our journey, right, it's kind of good to measure things against, the word, the book, etc. And there's parallel truths there's one truth, right? So I shouldn't say parallel truths, but there are, let's say, there are interwoven truths around the word that's enrich things. All right. So when I say that, I mean, Enoch's great. Right? It's written for our age. It's written for the time of the end. I just want to quote one little verse here, if that's okay, which is, Enoch 104:10, and it says, "Another mystery I'll also point out: to the righteous and to the wise shall be given Sephrim of joy, of integrity, and of great wisdom. To them shall Sephrim be given, in which they shall believe, in which they shall rejoice." And hallelujah, what a great thing! So, and in that measure, but it's written for the time of the end. We should be have expectation that we will find books, whether it be Malcolm going into a secondhand bookshop or Dr. P or me or whatever, and this, a book popping off the shelf as is that's missing bits of, the Gospel of Paul or whatever it's going to be, or Ezra or whatever it's going to be, right? So we do find things, and I think it's a real blessing and a promise that this will happen at this time. Okay, and as we add fidelity to things, there's Daniel says books that the book's locked to the end of time, which is kind of probably another spiritual understanding of the revelation that we've seen over the past 50 years. We've got the Dead Sea Scrolls that have been opened up. We've got other prophecies like the Malachi, Last Pope ones. We've got information availability through books. And Enoch's one of the books. We talk about the Apocrypha, what should be in, what should be out. But there are other works that are there by inspire people that have been vessels of Yah. Okay, now it's up to us to hold that up to the light of and the candle of truth and see whether the truths are actually false truths or real truths. And I think I'll leave that up to you guys today when we go through this next one of these books. I'm going to go through about. Well, we'll go through that very shortly. Actually, we'll put it on the table and have a discussion, Dr. P. And obviously, Torah codes and news media. Right. So, what are your thoughts, Dr. P? I mean, we are at this time, right? We're at the end.
Oh yeah, I agree with this. Yeah, and this passage in Enoch is, and of great wisdom to them shall Sephrim be given, in which they shall believe. And of course, we're seeing now that as Daniel prophesied in Daniel 12, right, that knowledge would increase, knowledge would greatly increase at the end times, and people would go to and fro. And we're seeing knowledge increase now exponentially. I mean, they say that the information database is doubling every 10 hours now. And so we have a tremendous amount of information coming in, and everything that was known, everything that can be known is just flowing in. We're getting a huge antediluvian record. We're getting a comprehensive prophecy record. And we're beginning to see now, one of the difficulties is, of course, is that in the juggling of the world here, John, over the last, 2,000 years, we've seen religions break out. And with religions, you have a certain kind of behavior being dictated by a leadership cadre that says, in our religion, your behavior has to be like this. And some of this is scriptural, a lot of it isn't. For instance, we know in the Catholic Church, there's a catechism. We know in the Presbyterian Church, there's a book of order. There are extra scriptural. We know in Judaism, there's a Talmud. We have extra scriptural advice that's being given in every single religion because people are creating a pathway of behavior, right? That's going to be governed by the leadership. And of course, in the Protestant world, we've had this explosion of interdenominationalism that has just been incredible. I mean, thousands, tens of thousands of denominations now of people doing things their own way. In the meantime, what do we see about Scripture? Well, one of the things that's happened is a lot of people have come out and said, for instance, our friend Lou White, who wrote Fossilized Customs. Oh, that's pagan. This is pagan. That's pagan. The other thing's pagan, 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 bad, 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 pagan, bad, 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 pagan. Well, the pagans have used everything that's on the table. Therefore, everything that's on the table is pagan, right? And that logical fallacy is really dangerous to the community because it prevents the community from discovering the full truth of Scripture. So as a consequence, we were given 66 books saying that's enough for you people. This is all you get. You get 66 books. That's enough. That's all you're going to get. Your inquiry should go no further. And we'll tell you what to do premised upon those 66 books, no matter how bad the translation may be. And this became a real difficult thing. So what do we find out? People who love the truth and who seek the truth. And, and again, you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. And what's it say in 2 Thessalonians 2? They were given over to damnation because they did not love the truth. They were given over to deception. They were given over to a great delusion. They've been given over because they refused to seek and find the truth.
Yeah.
So for us who are committed to the truth, we seek and we look and we find, and we have to have minds of discernment that allow us to read something that somebody else told you can't read. Somebody else who put pants on both legs at the same time instead of one leg at a time like me and you. Therefore, they have the right to tell us, I read it, you can't.
Yeah, no, spot on, exactly right, and so, we have to be just hold the fire, just look at it and be open-minded. But I mean, on my walk, Dale's helped with this presentation. I've reached out to David on a few different topics, Malcolm, obviously, etc. So, as a group, we're all there seeking the truth, and I think that's the beauty of this group, really, is that we're able to share and ponder on things. Can we not nudge to the next slide? Is that okay?
Yep.
Great. So this one, right, on a move, I'm moving in a general direction. So, we're kind of told about evolution. Big Bang. We're starting to rock flying through space. We've come from the swamp. We've evolved from apes. Blah blah blah. Right. And instead of evolution, at best, we're sort of evolutionary decline. And in reality, we're probably in complete free fall again, evolutionary, right? We're being poisoned left, right, and center, whatever, devolving. And you got to look at, so it's the antipathy of where we are. Because this statement here in Isaiah is saying, it's more about restoration. It's saying, Isaiah 30:26, moreover, the light of the moon shall be as light as the sun. The light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days, in the day that Yahuah binds at the breach of his people and heals the stroke of their wound. So this is about restoration. And in Enoch 78:4, obviously I read it before, like last night, is saying, the sun has got 7 parts of light. So it kind of chimes in, So, and I've always wondered why Enoch's got so many chapters on the, on the luminaries, about the movements, these doors opening, closing, and the planets, and blah blah blah. And there's a big emphasis there. So it shows in his belief and in Yah's belief, there's a big orchestra going above, right? In time, in motion, very planned, very predicted, in order, not chaos, not disorder, not rocks being. Anyway, so that's just a. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think this is you've really cracked the nut here on a very good subject. Because, so Gary Bell says, the overlords of our earth, the ones who truly believe they are descended from the gods, who I call the Illuminati, are guided by astrology, numerology, and sacred geometry. Well,
Yep.
yeah. Well, their version of sacred geometry, their version of numerology, and their version of astrology. You have to keep in mind that when you talk about astrology, let's talk about this for just a moment, because you have two concepts: astrology, astronomy, right? And they come from the Greek astrologia, astronomos, right? So when you're talking about astrology, this is the logic of the stars. Astronomy is the law, nomos, law, the law of the stars. So astronomy, the law of the stars; astrology, the logic of the stars. It's the same thing with numerology. You could have numeronomy as well, the law of numbers, as compared to the logic of numbers. Same thing with geometry, right? And so we see that. And invariably what you have in geometry, particularly when you're talking about the Illuminati, they're governed by the concept of division. They're governed by the concept of division. They work in an alternative way. In other words, they work in, I don't know why words are at a loss to me today, but they are. But they work in this idea of moving backwards in retrograde rather than working forward. So you see them trying to divide to reach their equations, which ultimately result in what? 33, right? Or 0.33. Right? Invariably, they get to 33. Invariably, they get to 0.33, whatever it may be. Now, I've seen a lot of discussion about this, particularly in terms of the alignment of the pyramids of Giza and how they relate to a 33rd degree, and the 33rd degree, which interestingly enough, from Giza, if you put zero longitude at Giza, 33.3 degrees runs right from London right up to Edinburgh.
Oh.
Right. So again, you see this Masonic order dealing with this concept of division. Why? Because they're putting a tool to the stone, right? Yah told them, make an altar of unhewn stone, because if you cut the stone in any respect, you have polluted or defiled the altar. And yet the Masons are going to defile the altar with an altar of hewn stone. In fact, everything they do is about the hewn stone. And, the more I talk about, when I did the presentation on the Mishkan, John, I became convinced that what we were talking about in the Mishkan is this was a tent that was supposed to be made of linen and furs. This is what it was. And it was, particular identity. And it, when you read it, it had this structure of beams, if you will, and the linen and fur over the top of it. There was no wood on the top. It was open with just linen and fur. And then inside the Ark of the Covenant. Why? Because this would transact static electricity. This would transact electricity. This is why you couldn't walk in there if you're wearing wool, because you touch off a wool spark, you're going to get zapped with 50,000 volts. So the priest must wear linen and linen only, and you can't have any wool in that linen at all. right? That's the reason for the rule. And Solomon abandoned that. Solomon said, I'm going to build a temple. Well, when Yah says in 2 Samuel, I'm going to build a temple for my name, he's talking about Mashiach. He's not talking about a stone edifice. Very, very important stuff. And the stone, and look, you go through Britain, and what do you see? You see these magnificent stone edifices. I mean, go up to Edinburgh, right? The whole town is a stone edifice. And you look at that going, okay, well, you Masons got a little carried away in this place,
Yeah, Oxford and Cambridge the same, right? You go to London, it's like all these, isn't it? You just see it. And as you said, it struck me about the churches as well. As you think about Charters Cathedral and stuff, these famous ones, but every church in England pretty much is stone, right? It's just, it's the way it is, right? It's all.
And and they don't go to these stone churches and go, hey, let's pressure wash them. No. We were down at Canterbury watching the Canterbury Cathedral, reclamation. They weren't pressure washing any stone. They were replacing the stone with active masons. Just when we got up to York Minster, they were doing the same thing. There were active masons outside using their tools on stone to create replacement stone for the church.
And in Oxford, all of the pinions, they've got these really long spires with all the ornate stuff on top. Every 4 years they're replaced. They've got continuous stonemasons working out all the time. Right? Every 4 years, every one of them's replaced across Oxford.
Expense.
So that's a principle, right? That's a principle. They've got to keep going, which is part of their ritual, right?
Yeah, that's part of the ritual. And here we go. And so this is why when we talk about this, when you talk about the Illuminati going down this path, this idea of, and keep this in mind, when they decided to build an edifice of stone, they rejected the Ibn Rosh Pina, right? The chief cornerstone that was rejected. That's the way Scripture puts it. The chief cornerstone that was rejected. They rejected the chief cornerstone in order to build their own stone edifice. And again, this is a huge misleading. And because it's a huge misleading, we've been taken down a path of buildings. And so here we are. I mean, you could go in and you can look. You remember what the reaction of the apostles were when they walked into Jerusalem. They get in there and they look at Mashiach and they look at that temple. Wow. Look at that craftsmanship. Look at those stones piled high. Look at the magnificence of those doorways. Wow. And Mashiach looks at him and says, I tell you the truth. Every stone shall be removed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every stone shall be removed. Right. But I will rebuild it in 3 days. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a prologue for the next slide, okay? Just because a couple of things, really. One is, I want to thank Tom Horn Publishing for allowing us to reproduce some of this work for the slides for today, because it's under copyright with a couple of books. And secondly, there've been things that have been hidden from us, all right? So the book this comes from is called The Temple at the Center of Time, written by a guy called David Flynn. So David Flynn. Yeah. So he took the work. So basically, Isaac Newton, who everybody knows, right, mid 1600s to mid 1700s, was 30 years head of maths at Cambridge. 30 years as the head of the Royal Society, which we all know is kind of, out there. So he had access to all the books throughout history that he'd want access to, right? So he get the ancient writings from John Dee, Aristotle, Pythagoras, or whoever, and have access to it all. Anyway, when he died, a lot of his papers that are scientific were stayed in the universities, etc. But a lot of the theological papers were sent back to the family, right? And so over several hundred years, like 300 years later, they kind of arrived in the 1900s anyway. And at some point, David Flynn got his hands on them and started going through them. So he developed a model from what Isaac Newton had done based on a couple of equations he put together, which are 30 years apart. Because Isaac Newton was one of these illuminated ones and didn't want anyone finding accidentally any of his secret stuff, right? So, and this book goes into that, which is great. But I pulled out here a couple of things, but I thought the book would be kind of interesting as a group. The first is on the left. Obviously you've got the cubit, right, which is kind of the elbow to the tip of the middle finger measurement. So on this left pillar, I bought an old Encyclopedia Britannica a year ago because I thought I wanted the baseline to understand, the internet changes every minute, right? So you've got to have something as a baseline. So I used that. And if you look top to bottom now, the sacred cubits, they're all there around 20 to 25, 26, sort of inches, right? 20, if you look at the Giza second one down, if you measure the planet from the north to the south pole across vertically, it's something like 25 million, you can Google it anyway, 25 million 0265 inches. And in Giza, this exact measurement of 25.0265 is found in 3 places. Okay. If you go further down,
at Giza, what is 25?
There's the measurements found 3 times in the Giza pyramid. So Giza pyramid is obviously lots of different.
Okay.
So within the chambers, etc., they found this measurements, this special measurement of 25.020. It's at the bottom there anyway, 0265, which is exactly to sort of 4 decimal places the inches of the Earth from north to south. Okay, so it's specific, so specific nobody could ever do it. Right, it's impossible. If you look at the Brazen Sea, and this is Encyclopedia Britannica, they're saying if it had a flat base, it'd be 23 cubits. If it had a round base, it'd be 26, or it could be somewhere in between. So we know the range that Solomon was using was somewhere between 23 inches and 26. Okay. If you go further down in Assyria, it's 25.2, and the Hebrew sacred cubit, apparently, according to David Flynn, is 25.2. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because there's kind of a hidden knowledge. Somebody knew something at that time about the number 25.2, I think, or certainly David Flynn thought, and it seems to be rational. Okay. And as I move across left to right, you'll see. So the middle column is, we find certain angles, right? So we've got like 36.52 degrees, 51.19 degrees, etc. Now, how do you get those angles in, in these charters or etc.? And one of the thoughts there, again, from another book, which I was reading, is having a Druid's cord. So you have a cord of 13 sections with 12 knots. Each knot would be a cubit wide. And then you'd be able to, with that cord, make certain angles very quickly and very easily. So then you could do your geometry for inside churches, inside charters, or inside stone circles very quickly. It's just one theory of how it's done. Okay. But again, I'm linking the cubit.
Where's this Druid cord used? I mean,
I basically a book called The Pyramid Decoded, and it was saying that there's this measurer, I think it was, who was a chap that studied Chartres Cathedral, and he's looking at the measurements, and I don't know, but in his book he documents how the Druid's cord was used. So in terms of, obviously, I don't know if it had like a monk's wrap around the waist, and they'd got it out, and then go to the stonemasons and get the cord out, and by the number of knots they could
measure very quickly. It's like having a measuring tape on your belt.
Effectively, exactly, and they could get the exact measurements. But if you look at the pyramid at Giza, third pyramid at Giza, it's got the exact 51.19 degrees to the exact degree, right, as one of these chords. So we can't say that's how it was done, but it's a theory, and it would meet out with this, this proposition here by measuring. Okay, so only the reference at the bottom. But what's most alarming now is on the right here. So you can go onto the NASA website. I've done it, right? I've checked it out. But if you look at the Earth, very simply, it's the number like right on the wall, 2520, right? 2520 times pi is 7916.813 miles, which is the it's basically across the Earth, right? So if you want to get the diameter of the Earth, that's it. If you go to the NASA website, it's 7917.479. Right, so you're talking about like a mile out across 8,000 miles. If you look at the moon, you take the same number, 2520, and take 360 off, it's 2160 miles. Now, I went to the NASA website earlier, and if you Google it, it's 2159.2. So you're 0.8 of a mile out. All right. If you go to, and again, this is look, this is too incredible to believe, but check it out. The bottom one is the same number, 2520, with 7s, right? If you look at the NASA, it's 864. This one's a bit further out, but it's the sun, for goodness sake, right? NASA could be wrong. But if you look at it, there's something divine here with the numbers, or sacred with the numbers, to have 2520 and the 7s in it. That's not normal. And then if you look at the distance between, the mean distance between the Earth and the Moon, it's 77.77 times 7 pi. Now, this has come out of the documents from Isaac Newton. which he got maybe from Pythagoras or somebody else in the past. Now, this is kind of jaw dropping if you take it on at face value, but the numbers, and they equate to, you can Google it, right? You can get on a spreadsheet, try it out yourself. So that shows some divine order. It shows we're not Big Bang. It shows we're not just a dusty rock in space, but it shows that we're living on fallen nature of this earth, fallen nature of the moon. I mean, the moon might have been populated. Who knows? It might have been green, right? It's just, it might have been the sun. It says it's 7 times brighter. So it might have been the sun before, the earth. So it shows the primordial nature of things, that, it's in a fallen nature now, and we're just ignoring it, or we're told a lie effectively now. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, no, I think this is outstanding. And, when you talk about this kind of thing, like, for instance, Enoch talks about the moon and the sun being the same size in the sky, when you look at it, right? And of course, we see this evidence when we talk about a solar eclipse where the moon passes in front of the sun, blocks out almost all of it except for its immediate radiation around the edge. Or you talk about the earth blocking out the moon like it did last night in the lunar eclipse.
Yeah.
But the thing is that ratio has to be exact. In other words, you have to have some exact ratio of the sun to the moon, and then the distance is going to equate to that ratio between the two, between the moon and the sun. And we see this ratio expressed in this 7 times 7 times 7. Now, what we don't see here is we don't see the core of this 2520. And this 2520 has, you're mentioning some really keen things to me. Like, one thing I didn't know, but I found out today. In the pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, there's 144,000 stones.
Oh, didn't know
yeah,
that.
Exactly 144,000 stones. And those and of course, the Pyramid of Giza faces perfectly north. In fact, it's more perfectly north than any other building on Earth in terms of its pointing to true north. So you have some understanding here that was taking place, and is it in the sacred cubit? I think the sacred cubit's part of it. There are other people who argue that the sacred frequency of 432 hertz is also relevant to this discovery of everything that is here, And so, I mean, there's a lot to be said about what you're talking about in this relationship. Now, in addition to that, there's a book. I don't remember the name of it now. I have it somewhere in my library, but it's about Stonehenge. And the author went into Stonehenge.
Ancient knowledge.
Ancient knowledge, yeah. Are you talking about this book today?
No, I'm not, but I have it. Very good book. Go on.
But in that book, in Ancient Knowledge, he goes in and he says, let's take a look at this. And what he does is he draws 9 circles that are developed inside Stonehenge. And he immediately repudiates the fact that it does not find the vernal equinox. So it's ridiculous to think this was a human sacrifice spot. That's just stupid. And instead, he draws the circle in, and he says, I'm going to just connect this as if I had string around these stones to connect these various circles. And by doing so, he found an algorithm. And he found an algorithm that is consistent in documenting. Like, for instance, we're finding an algorithm here. The 25.2 is an algorithm that is existing in both the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun. We see this algorithm, and we not only see the algorithm in terms of its size of these orbs, but we also see the algorithm in terms of its distance. And what he proved in Stonehenge, he was a non-believer. What he proved in Ancient Knowledge was that each one of the planets is situated on that algorithm as a factor of that algorithm all the way out, and all 10 planets, not 9, 10, because there was an asteroid belt that was destroyed at some time in history. And so there were 10 orbits around the sun, one of them which was destroyed into an asteroid belt, and Stonehenge predicts their orbit within 3 decimal points.
It does.
Now, based on this algorithm. And so what's mind-boggling about that is, and again, what he concluded was not that he'd found this glorious algorithm and all of a sudden he's the smartest guy on earth, but rather that he concluded that the solar system was perfectly ordered. That its perfect order was known by those who put up Stonehenge.
And exactly. And this is when I alluded at the beginning to people that just, that's one of the books I bought for people, and people just looked at it and thought, well, it's incredible, it's too incredible to be true, and thrown it away kind of thing. Whereas in reality, the fact that it gets the aphelion and the perihelion, that's width of the stones, gives the distance to and from for each planet as they're revolving, which is an elliptical orbit, not a round one, and it's in that equation. It's just absolutely stunning. and say you
It
can't.
is funny. It's just it's enough to knock you over. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So anyway, we'll crack on to the next slide. But anyway, this is fallen world stuff, right? So right, this
And
one.
also, when you mention David Flynn, it's worth talking about here too.
Go back
This
up.
book of David Flynn is also a great book for people to get. They haven't read it before. And of course, David Flynn, died young from exposing this stuff.
Yes, exactly. No, exactly. He knew too much too quickly, and he was a truther. He's out there revealing it. He's a vessel for the kingdom, definitely. He was.
Yeah.
So this one, I'm riffing off what you and Malcolm sort of went on Friday, right? Nicodemus, but it's spot on. This is the one I looked at some time ago, and this is the you got to find the smoking flame as to why you want to use certain techniques. And Nicodemus 22:11. And again, the thing that makes me smile and laugh at this one is that Herod goes to the temple. He sends everybody else out apart from the scribes, whatever else, and it says, was this really Jesus of Nazareth? Was it really Yeshua, etc., that was there? After he'd had 3 hours of blackout, earthquakes, all this sort of stuff going on, and whatever, he still didn't believe. So tell us how. And at the bottom here in the highlighted bit, they knew because the 2 cubits and a half of the building of the Ark of the Covenant were perceived and knew that the 2,500 of Yahuah HaMashiach was to come, the Ark of the Tabernacle of the body. So they used measurements of time against measurements of units of distance across the Ark, which is 2.5 cubits, right? Based on Adam and Eve, and a statement in there where I think Gabriel or one of the angels came down and told them it's going to be this time, right? So that's my little flame in the background saying that's the line in the sand for me for the next slide. It's going to come up in a second. But before we get to that, I just want to highlight two things. One is the nautical mile here on the left was, do you know what? Until about 1730, they're using 1,000 Roman paces for nautical for miles, right? So about almost until the 1850s, they're using 1,000 Roman paces for measuring distance in terms of what a mile was, a nautical mile. And the nautical mile actually was only standardized in about 1921, or say 1929 there, first time. So the nautical mile wasn't a nautical mile at 6,076 feet until 1929, okay, which you'll understand on the next slide when I get to it. But the nautical mile anyway is, if you take 360 degrees, every degree has 60 minutes. Okay, so you've got 2,160 nautical miles across the Earth's surface, and a nautical mile is a bit longer than a statute mile because obviously it's got it's broken into a circle for navigation. Okay, so that's left. Then on the right, you got the John D. and Elizabeth I statute mile, which was obviously in the 1500s or whatever it was, where John D. basically was a bit of, we know John Dee's got a lot of reputation on different levels, right? He's done some dark stuff with Edward Kelly. He's done some other stuff with Elizabeth and this nautical mile stuff. He's done some spy stuff going on and all sorts of things, right? But he did have the biggest library in England at the time, at Mortlake, 4,000 books. And so he was working with Elizabeth to build the statute mile, and he put it as being 5,280 feet, which is pi times 7, which is a ratio you'll see on the previous slides when you look at the Earth's diameters, etc. Okay, and so there's a space-time calculation there which holds true. So if we just spin to the next slide a second, this is where it kind of makes sense. Okay, so we have a map here, and I think Dr. P is still there, hopefully.
We'll come back here.
Great, yeah. So we've got a map here, and the idea here, and it's beggars belief really. You look at it and you're thinking, is this real? And I've checked it on Google Earth. Anyway, and if you get the book, you can see what it means about the Dome of the Spirits. And I've got another book here written by John Mitchell, and John Mitchell's done a similar thing about the Dome of the Spirits, about it possibly being the temple. Whether it's a temple or not, there's some amazing numbers here. But in the John Mitchell book, he actually goes to the old streets in Jerusalem, and he makes a star around the old streets, right, and in the center of the star is the Dome of the Spirits. So they're taking the Dome of the Spirits as being the center of Jerusalem, let's call it that, rather than Temple Mount or anything else, because I don't want to draw any arguments on that. But if you take that,
what's the name of that book again?
So the temple at Jerusalem and Revelation by John Mitchell. Okay, that this one.
And then where does he show the center dome in Jerusalem?
He goes. John Mitchell goes into it and he puts it as being the same thing as upon here, which is the Dome of the Spirits. It's not the Dome of the Rock. It's a small thing next door to it. It's called the Dome of the Spirits. Okay.
Okay.
And so it's very close to it. But basically, you got to think. And he says in this book that you had hundreds of years with like nothing there. And so Herod built something, and where he built this thing, the old streets actually form a pentagon. Not a complete one, but most of one, and it kind of in the center of that is the Dome of the Spirits. So anyway, that's my second witness a little bit in terms of maybe this location. Now, I'm not saying this is the temple. I'm just saying it's on a map as a way marker for Jerusalem. Maybe it's centered Jerusalem or this version of Jerusalem. But if you look at this anyway, I'll stop talking. If you take this and basically the thing we found out was that statute miles are pre-Christ, and the nautical miles are, AD. Okay, so that's why when I say nautical miles, they're only invented in 1929, right? So there's impossible for Newton or anybody else to find this stuff, A, before nautical miles were invented, or B, before something like Google Earth, right? Couldn't have happened. So it has to be for this time, if you believe in this map, and if you believe any of these things aren't coincidence. So the first thing is there's 1,948 nautical miles between London and Jerusalem. And if you look at the left, in 1948, Britain withdrew from Palestine and Israel was formed. Okay, there's 1,799 nautical miles between the city island of Paris, where Notre Dame was, and that mount. And in 1799, Napoleon declares Palestine to be the homeland for the Jews. Okay, he wrote that statement out. It's put down in law. Okay, or put down as a tenet.
Okay, now not to give Tom Horn any grief, but Paris is not in Spain. Paris is supposed to be in
sorry. Okay. Oh, sorry, no, I have to move it further. That's me. Sorry, it's me.
Oh, that was you? Oh, okay.
Sorry. Me. I was summarizing, obviously, I had a late night. And some problems on that. So
well, it also makes it cleaner to read, too.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for the kindness on that. But, Giza Pyramid is 1,441,000 feet, which is around the time of the Exodus. Mecca is 666 nautical miles. You've got to start looking at the. Sorry, I'm just getting ahead of myself here. But the fall of Jerusalem to Babylon is in 587 BC, and in the Babylon falls to Persia in 539. Right, so all these are mapped out in miles. Now, again, it's hard to believe, but it's there. In the top bit here is a zoom in of Jerusalem, and again we've got 66.6 nautical miles to Gadara. Right now, again, what you do with this information, I don't know, but it's information. It might be a very coincidental information. Washington D.C. monument is 77 times 6666 miles. Okay,
right, and the Washington Monument is 555 feet above the ground, but there's 111 feet of foundation underneath it. So it's technically 666 feet tall from the base of its foundation.
Wow. So if we're going to read any messages from this, we've got Washington Monument as having the 666 marker. We've got Mecca. We've got Gadara, with obviously that, and we've got Shushan, which is obviously Babylon. We've got 666. But
yeah, no, Shushan is something else too to keep in mind too, because Shushan is where Daniel ends up, right? Daniel ends up in Shushan. In fact, his tomb is in Shushan.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay. So this is just information. It's kind of a bit out there, but at the top, it says in Jubilees, it says, and he knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, and the dwelling of the Lord, and Mount Sinai is the center of the desert, and Mount Zion is the center and navel of the earth. So if Mount Zion is the red dots here, and if it is here in the center of the navel of the earth, then that would be, glory to Yah, basically. Anyway, it's what do you make of these numbers? Is it coincidence that all these things are at this time? It's worth getting the book. The Temple at the Center of Time has a lot more information about exact locations. They go onto the threshing floor in Jerusalem,
Ah, very
and it also
interesting.
goes into crop circles,
Mm,
saying, kind of interesting thing that crop circles are always flattened within the months of Omar. So you
yeah.
have it from sort of May until September, which is the harvesting, and only on certain crops, and
Mm,
it's always flattened in a certain way. So if you look at the way historically the threshing floor would have been, it would have flattened wheat in a circle with a horse and cart in the same way that
mm,
you see crop circles. Now that's another weird, bizarre thing, but it puts it out there as a conversation and as a thought process to thinking, you know,
yeah.
there's more to it than just what we're told
Yeah.
on the news.
Yeah. And your presentations, they're available so people can see these books close up, and all the
Yeah,
details are there
yeah,
for it. I think we're having some problems with bandwidth, which is why Stephen is freezing and coming off and on. So just continue telling me when you want to go to the next slide, and we'll try and work on it. It's quite difficult today. We are having issues.
sure. Okay. So
There we go.
Here. There
okay,
we
Dr. P. So anyway, so that's information, Dr. P. Anyway, right? It's worthy of consideration, just in terms of it's if you had to do the lottery to hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 locations with these numbers, you'd be a millionaire 3 times over.
Yeah. Plus, you can't. I can guarantee they didn't know these numbers when the Washington Monument was built. They
Yes.
didn't. Nobody had gone out there and flown over there and calculated the distance.
No, exactly right. I'd say that the nautical mile hadn't been invented, all these other things, right? So this is a bigger hand at work. So for the presentation today, I kind of wanted to show the planets, the fact that there's a bigger hand at work there. That we should, when the lights go out, when the internet's off, and we're all contemplating the truth, we've got Psalm 91 going on in the background, and we've got sort of the truth will be our shield and buckler. This will be one of those truths, right? We're sitting on a rock here, which has been perfectly formed. So, anyway, let's move to the next slide, if that's okay.
I don't think we're going to get through your 25 slides here. They're too detailed. We're into the last quarter now. So
Yeah, well,
just
there's
continue
only
until
2
you
slides
can.
actually. There's only 2
Oh,
slides.
okay.
We'll
There's this
have to
one.
do part 2, Jesse. You got
Huh?
to do. We'll have to do part 2.
Yeah. Sorry, there's only a couple of slides. Don't worry. So
Okay.
this one is one of these, which is more of a lottery. All right. I've got a couple of books there. One of them I can publish, which is 1925. It's just had a copyright on the right hand side there. The Great Pyramid Decoded, which I got. And the other one's the Great Pyramid on the right, and the other one's the Great Pyramid Decoded. So I put numbers in, and the idea here on the Great Pyramid, and I've seen this in a number of books and online in a number of places, but I can only publish the ones that are out of copyright. So the idea is from right to left. Again, you got this whole time dimension, okay, going on. So you got 4000 BC at the right, and as you move from right to left, you're hitting different waymarks. All right. So the first one there is 1400 whatever BC. I can't read that. The next one is 30 AD, which is when the crucifixion effectively, which starts in the Grand Gallery. Coming out of that, you got 1914. Now, when I look online and the books I've seen, all these numbers up to the 1914 concur for the people who've used the same. If you look at the Book of the Dead, they look at the going up is going to ascension and going down is going to the pit. Now, if you look at that and look at these books, and if you, again, this might be a load of baloney, but it's been written about, and people look at scratchings on walls and say, oh, this is when Moses left Egypt, this is when X, Y, and Z, right? But I've just put the more salient bits in that are for convenience of conversation. So in 1914, the ones I've seen on the internet and these 2 books here concur that the pit starts and the pit opens and things happen in the pit. All right. It also is the end of the Grand Gallery. And after that, then we have a period between that line and the final line, which is depending on measurements. The book on the right there was written in 1925, and it thought the end of the world was going to be 1953, which didn't happen. Right. So I think they got the measurements wrong. They were using the wrong pyramid inch or something. The Great Pyramid Decoded has a number that's in these red numbers here, but I can't say which one was copyright reasons, but it's in there. so basically, we're looking there at another possibility for time and measurement, which take it seriously, don't take it seriously, but there's been quite a few books made about it, and we know the pyramid has got a lot more to it than just 144,000 blocks. So that's just
that's interesting. The 4,000 BC. I mean, if that 4,000 BC, of course, I don't know the reason why they're claiming that as the starting point of the calculation, but that appears to be an antediluvian number, 4,000 BC, pre-flood
yes.
number.
Yeah, for sure.
1486 BC is around the year, pretty close. I mean, Dr. Miles Jones, believes that the Exodus began in 1492 BC.
Okay.
But 1486 could be the marker showing the beginning of the Exodus, 1486 BC, the beginning of the Exodus.
Sure.
And then 30 AD, of course, 30 AD being, and again, these numbers could be off just by a couple of years, right? They could be off just
by a couple of years. An inch or out, and depending on what cubit length you use, right? So it's all. So, but anyway, so that's just for consideration. And then look at the dead, and again on the left here, you've got the plane of life at the top and the plane of death at the bottom. And that was the the logic behind it. Now, I'm not a pyramidologist. I haven't studied this. I've read a few books on it, and I just put it there for information sharing purposes, because again, it's kind of potentially prophetic in its timing. One thing I've missed off from this is I haven't knocked off the top of it. Right, we haven't got a capstone.
Right, capstone really make a difference. If the capstone, I'm convinced, just between us, John, that the capstone, there was something with the capstone. I don't know if it was a gold capstone or what it was, but if it was a gold capstone, or if it was a monatomic capstone, that there is a harnessing of static electricity that I believe was going on, and I think the pyramids were a part of it. And they were not only harnessing the static electricity, but they were harnessing a frequency. They were harnessing frequencies, and by harnessing frequencies, they were able to achieve a measure of electricity around the world that could be readily tapped. I mean, for instance, if you had massive voltage, 200,000 volts, but they were coming out at microamps, 1/10 of an amp, 1/100th of an amp. Yeah. If you have with transformers, you can transform that into 220, 240 volts at some measure of amperage, 10 amps, 20 amps. I don't know how Ohm's law would convert that number. But depending on the massive amount of voltage compared to a very microscopic amount of amperage being converted through an Ohm's transformer, you're going to be able to run electric machinery with zero batteries, right? This is no longer using lithium batteries that are now burning down everybody's house or setting planes on fire or whatever, but rather no battery at all. You're tapping into the anode cathode aspect of the Earth, and which Tesla was trying to reach. And I think they may have had this technology. I mean, this is some of the things we're starting to see. Now, equally important, and I think this is a question we have to ask ourselves: orchestrated, right? Known, designed, right? And who were the designers, and who were the orchestrators, and who were they that knew, right? And of course, all of these things, I think, when you see stuff like the location away from Jerusalem, this appears sacred event. These are sacred occurrences. And it's just as when we look out on the history of mankind right now, we see that mankind may think, we're going to avoid judgment because we're going to turn to righteousness. I don't think so. Yah knows the beginning from the end, and the judgment has come because the people, just as prophesied in Jubilees 1, the people have come to this point. I mean, that's what's happened, right? So, I think what we have to look at now is, this orchestration in these events, I think, do mean something. Yes. Now, the question is inside the community, John, and this is part of the reason why I really like going to Britain, because I can talk with people like you and like Malcolm and like Jessica. In the States, somebody immediately calls you pagan and then wants to burn you at the stake. So it's difficult to have an intellectual conversation, but anyway, let's continue. Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah. Okay. So this one really, I thought would be more topical for now, because I wanted to. I mean, I think the previous slides are just to show, glory to Yah, basically, just amazing. This slide really, I've been trying to monitor the eclipses, the solar and lunar eclipses over the period, right, from 2017. And we've had all spate of them, and obviously these are signs, like warning signs of the car, right? Be careful before it happens. There's going to be a crash happening, right? So if you go down this list, there's a load of them, right, over the past few years. And then you get the one tonight, and it stops. It stops until 2024. There's no more total eclipses at all, where they've got partial ones. All right.
Wow.
So what does that tell you? The fact we've had a few years of eclipse, really dramatic ones, and suddenly there's a silence. That's a warning. That is telling me that the warnings are all over, guys. Things are going to hit the road now, or there's nothing to do. I
There
don't know
was
which.
silence in heaven for half an hour, right? You remember this? There was the silence in heaven for a half an hour.
So, but what's interesting here is I picked the red one out there because, we Dylan and I do the class on the, on the luminaries with John at the Sefer, and there's a few things to pull out, but the red one there is kind of interesting date. With that was Hanukkah, 14th of December 20, and that's the rollout of the vaccine in UK in the US on Hanukkah, on a complete solar eclipse of Antarctica. Okay. Then you move on now, and the next one coming up, which is partial, is in May. Now, again, apparently Prince Charles has moved his coronation forward by a month to coincide with the eclipse here on the
Really?
6th of May. Right, this is fifth, 6th of the eclipse, and he's moved it to that date. So it shows that, as I said on the earlier slides, when they look at the all the signs and all the numbers and everything else, they love to pick dates like election tonight. They know all these dates years ahead. So I'm sure they'll pick tonight as election day because there's an omen there somewhere, or they can capitalize on some energies or something.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that was it really for today. Sorry.
Well, keep this in mind though too, John. In the States, the first Tuesday of November is election day.
Ah, okay. So,
Well,
maybe it's the other way around then. Maybe you'll put it today.
Yeah, the second Tuesday of election day, and the second Tuesday of November is election day. That's always been the case. No,
Yes.
it hasn't always been the case. Election should have been on November 1st. It's the first Tuesday. So you're right. They skipped it. Yeah. They skipped it. They skipped the election date in order to pump it up to the 8th.
Yeah. So anyway, there's hidden hands all over the place, and the knowledge has been hidden from us because they want to put us into this dystopian stage where we're this amoeba on the planet. They want to make us all into cybernetics in us, controllers. Go back to the feudalism of the 1200s.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly where they're headed. It's like you serfs need to get out here on the Demesne and start, hoeing the ground again,
Isn't
and we'll take your produce.
It is, and it's interesting to look at the kings of the earth as well. Because are they the tech companies? Is it the Elon Musks of the world, etc., or is it the nations? When they talk about the heads of the beast, etc. It's kind of interesting because of the weight that the World Economic Forum and so on. Now, these are all players at different levels, aren't they? And it's kind of it's like, what's the materiality of the King of Spain now, or the Queen of the Netherlands or whatever, or even obviously, whatever. It's interesting, isn't it?
Well, we're seeing the climax of the age. And as we see the climax of the age, all of these things start to come together. It's click, 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 click. The silence in heaven issue that you raised on that last slide is a big deal. Because we've seen Revelation unfold in a way we didn't expect to unfold, right? Really a technological holocaust that's being brought against mankind. And I don't think I didn't expect it.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it being done through the sorcery, pharmakia, and what is the mark and the triple helix and the 144,000 gene count and all of that thing, which is really a shock and a surprise. But it should not be a surprise because, like for instance, one of the things we find in Scripture, the 7 churches of Revelation laid out for us in the Anatolian Peninsula in Turkey, that's an exact map of the 7 stars of the Pleiades. What is that doing there? Why do those churches reflect the map of the Pleiades, right? And so we're beginning now that all of this kind of comes together, and there is an acute harmony in life that again is based upon this number stuff. It's absolutely acute, and we're going to discover something. I personally think we're on the verge of a huge revolution that is going to be anti-digital, if you will. that this whole construct that we currently have, this idea of using nuclear power and having batteries, running a digital this and a digital that, I personally believe that by the time we get into this revolution that's coming, people are going to be taking the heel of their boot and stomping their smartphone into pieces before they throw it in a dumpster. I mean, I think you're going to see this wholesale because, of course, the smartphone is weaponized against you. You know, right now it has certain advantages, but once they impose the social credit system worldwide, the smartphone is a weapon against you. It's a weapon against you. And when people realize that their communication system has been weaponized along with everything else, you're going to see people moving away from that in wholesale. Now, what's the dust look like? Do we go back to feudalism? I think in many places in the world, yeah, it's going to be a really backward world. You know, I believed when I was a kid, John, watching technology increase and knowledge increase, that as we were up into this technology age, that it would swing like a pendulum. We would reach an apex, you know, and then it would start swinging away. You know, if you look at the Roman Empire, you know, Rome had a huge, you know, the Justinian Code had a huge body of law. And then all of a sudden, by the time you get to Charlemagne, he couldn't read or write, and he becomes the Roman emperor, right? And he couldn't read or write. And in that period between 800 and 1066 AD, you know, you had a completely illiterate Europe. They couldn't read the Roman, let alone apply it. You know. And, you know, so only then do we start to restructure. Well, I believe we're going into that same thing here. We've got this pendulum that's swung out with this technology, and nobody asked the question, is digital technology the best we can do? Nobody asked that.
That's true.
That's where we're going, you know. And so now I think there is other technology that's there that we can clearly see it. You know, when you're talking about electromagnetism is a big issue. And when you're talking about this frequency upon which the earth relies, that's another big issue. And when we come to understand the electromagnetism and those frequencies, we're going to be able to discover means by which we can transport ourselves and carry ourselves and you know, energize ourselves without the idea of having nuclear power plants, without the idea of having, you know, solar panels or windmills or whatever, or any of that stuff. All that kinetic kind of thing, which there's plenty of energy, we just haven't tapped it. You know, there's a guy that I like watching, Nassan Harriman. I don't know if he's doing anything anymore. He did a lot of stuff for a while as a physicist. And he talked about the amount of energy that was contained in dark matter, right? You know, 2 to the 92nd power ergs per square centimeter of energy per square centimeter of dark matter, right? This is an unlimited, you know, amount of energy, and we have no means of tapping it. And he also developed a unified field theory, and Nassim Harriman. And, you know, he's completely ignored, of course. And just like all of this stuff, it goes in one ear and out the other, right?
Of course. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. So many new concepts here, as well as ones we're very used to. I know it's for another discussion, Stephen, but Shane's reminded me, and he studies this like you do, but you were talking about the Washington obelisk, and that it's 555 feet high, which is 6,660 inches, and is Tartaria harvesting electricity. That'd be really interesting to go into. And when you mentioned that, was the first thing I thought about Tartarian, and that it's quite astonishing, really. It just goes on and on, doesn't it? No end to this at all. Really interesting.
And we're just kind of untapping this knowledge now for the first time.
Yeah.
And the most critical thing is we have to make sure that we do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but rather eat from the tree of life.
Exactly, and that's and delineating that to make sure you're not going. I mean, I've read books and I felt spiritually dark after reading them, and I've just dropped them. And I thought, well, that's not good. That's bad. I mean, what do we call it? And so it's. And I'm not into doing that, obviously. but sometimes you have to look at some things to understand them. You know, like even some of the quantum computing stuff is dark. Even Edukalian stuff and the black magicians there is quite dark. But you need to know a little bit about it, so then you can play off it and you can understand what you're facing up against. Right?
Yeah. And this is a great foundation to work from. So thank you, gentlemen. Let's end just reading from Revelation 8, 1-6. It really sums up everything you two have been talking about today. And when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And then I saw the 7 angels which stood before Elohim and said to them, were given 7 shofars. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it in with prayers of all the Kodashim upon the golden altar that was before the throne. And the smoke of incense which came with the prayers of the Kodashim ascended up before Elohim out of the angel's hands. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 shofars prepared themselves to sound. With that, we want to say goodbye, bless you. Thank you for your commitment, for joining. And we will see you next time on Thursday now, YouTube Live with Dr. Pidgeon. Thank you again, gentlemen. It's been a great contribution. I know there'll be much discussion and question after. Take care, everybody. All the best now.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Jess.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Two people laughed. Two people cried. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Ever seen a blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side? Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there. Somewhere.